I'll go ahead and introduce myself. I didn't really do that from the start, but my name is Brian Story, and I work in the Office of Air and Radiation. I work in the Sector Policy and Programs Division, and specifically in the Minerals and Manufacturing Group. And I am the project lead on the proposed amendments to the dry cleaning NESHAP, which is codified in 40 CFR Part 63, Subpart M. Okay, so anyway, so what I'm discussing now is this technology review we've just completed. And so as part of our research, we reached out to local and state representatives and had calls with various states. We tried to focus on states that had varying degrees of activity in the dry cleaning, with the dry cleaning industry. That is to say, like there are some states like New York and California, for example, or Illinois, where they have very active programs. And then there are other states where they just don't have the resources to put as much into their program as the other states do. So we also found that there were states that were joining together to create some sort of environmental fund that, you know, fees and such were collected from the different facilities located in these various states that all contributed into a pot that was then used for environmental cleanup efforts, outreach, and that type of deal. And so in those states, they seem to have a pretty good handle on their dry cleaning operations, and were able to provide some very useful information on the industry from their perspective. We also had a SBEEP call at the very beginning of our efforts, and I'm not sure how many people have sat in on that. And then we've also been actively talking with the trade organizations. That includes John and Mary, but also we reached out to the Korean Dry Cleaners Association and spoke with them, and had a good talk with them as well. So from that research, we understand that there's been some significant economic impacts to the industry since 2006, and we can talk about that after I get done here. There's a variety of issues that the industry faces, changes that the industry faces, and one of those things is the optics of PERC use, specifically. Over the years, PERC has become, it's a good media thing to have in your newspaper if there's some sort of PERC release to the soils or water, and everything. And so the optics of PERC has changed over time, I would say. Because originally it was an alternative that was actually recommended by EPA at some point in time. But the other thing that we found in talking about the level of controls on these machines is that we were told that over the last 20 years, only the only machines that are being sold as new machines are what are called 4th and 5th generation machines. And that the machines are primarily manufactured in Europe, and so they're meeting European standards and such. And plus, with occupational safety as an important part, these 4th and 5th generation machines include both refrigerated condensers and carbon absorbers as secondary controls. The difference between a 4th and 5th generation machine is that a 5th generation machine will lock you out until the drying cycle is complete, and a 4th generation machine doesn't have that lockout mechanism. So they both provide the same level of controls, just that the 5th generation machine has a safety feature in it. And then the other thing is that we found was that facilities continue to switch to alternative solvents. We identified alternative solvents in 2006. The list has changed slightly, but it's primarily this, same alternative solvents being offered. And in fact, there are states like California and New York who are offering incentives for facilities to switch over to alternative solvents. And specifically in the South Coast Air Quality Management District in California, they've banned PERC altogether and have a list of alternative solvents that are approved by the district. And so our first action was to develop a facility list. And for this source category, it's a little bit difficult because a large percentage of the source category is made up of small businesses, and in some instances, very small businesses, such that there is only a husband and wife as employees. So they don't even show up on the Bureau of Labor Statistics database. I mean, they're that small. And in our air world, we typically track major sources. And so in this rule particularly, we don't have a good emissions inventory database that we can go to for a facility list. And so what we did was we went to the waste side of the equation and looked at PERC waste in the RCRA realm, resource conservation, whatever RCRA stands for. And so, through RCRA, the hazardous waste generators are tracked, and they're tracked down to the very small quantity generators. And so we made some assumptions and developed our facility list using primarily a list that was developed through hazardous waste generation. And from that list, we came up with about 9,000 facilities. And we estimate there's probably a little bit more than that are just below the radar altogether. And so for this rule, we're estimating that, well, I should say back in 2006, I think the count was something like 25,000, I think, or something like that, PERC using facilities. And in this estimate, we are saying that there are approximately 10 to 15,000 dry cleaning facilities that are using PERC. So there's been a significant decrease in the number of dry cleaning facilities from our time of 2006 to 2021 here. So what we did was we did a review of developments and practices, processes, and control technologies. And we have a very set blueprint of what we call developments in technology. And one of the things that I would point out is that we look at improvements to existing add-on control technologies or other equipment that were identified or considered during development of the NESHAP that could result in additional HAP emissions reductions. And I think that's where the conclusions that we came to here. We had made an assumption in our original promulgation of the rule and in 2006 that the useful life of a dry-to-dry machine is 15 years. And oh, by the way, transfer machines, we found that on a commercial side, people are not using transfer machines anymore. They're using dry-to-dry machines. And so I'll primarily be focusing here on dry-to-dry machines. But the useful life of a dry-to-dry machine is 15 years, plus or minus. So, with just the history of the rule, based on that assumption, the original NESHAP was in 93. And then, so if you were a major source, any new machine after 93 had to have both secondary controls. And then in 2005 for area sources, after 2005, I mean, giving 15 years, it would make sense that area sources also, just from the useful life of the machine to be able to continue operating, would have switched over to a newer machine. And that's an assumption that we're making here. So what we're saying in this amendment here is that we're proposing to require all sources in the source category to be fourth or fifth generation machines, or requiring that they have both refrigerated condensers and carbon absorbers as secondary controls. Now I will say we have a problem with that because of this gray area of very small businesses in the source category that we cannot quantify. And so what we're doing is we're putting out for public comment in this proposed rule that, any additional data that may improve our analyses. And we're specifically interested in receiving numbers of third generation or earlier models that are still being used, and trying to get a good handle on how many of those older machines are still in use. And so that's essentially what we're doing here in this proposed rule. I just wanted to mention that we did do an EJ analysis as part of our technology review. And as expected, dry cleaners are located on every corner. And so you would expect that there would be some impacts to EJ communities. And that's essentially true on every demographic. Well, I shouldn't say that. It's not every demographic, but for demographics, African Americans, multiracial groups, Hispanics, had tribal impacts. It's the averages are high. The demographic analysis indicated that the average populations are higher than the national averages. And so because of that, we also did additional outreach on the tribal community outreach calls. We did outreach on the national environmental justice calls and everything. So that has been part of our activity as well. The rule was signed on December 1st, and it was published soon after. And when it was published, because of this COVID thing, our procedures for public hearings has changed slightly. And so we had added language on public hearings under the pandemic situation, and there was an error published in the Federal Register on the dates of the public hearing. It didn't give our people enough time to set up the public hearing. There should be like 10 days spaced out. And so we ended up having to do a technical correction like right away. And so because of that, we pushed the comment period out to February 22nd so that it would coincide when the correction to the public hearing dates was published. And so the public comment period ends on February 2nd, or 22nd, I should say. And if you're interested in the docket ID, I can give you the docket ID if you want to provide comments. And the last thing I'll say, and then we can open up a comment. But I'm the point of contact on the proposed rule, but I have other rules under my wing, I guess, and some of them are becoming substantial here in the next year or so. And so the point of contact for the final rule is going to be Jen Alexander. She works in my group as well, and she's been assisting me during the proposal development. And so she is going to take over the final rule, and I'm going to mentor her during that time. So just wanted to give you that heads up. So that's all I have. If I'll take any kind of question you guys have, I guess, if you want to. It's a lot of information, I understand.
Thank you, Brian. So we did have a few comments as we went through in the chat that I'll bring up. Nancy in Kansas says their bureau remediation requires all PERC and other solvent dry cleaners register their facilities annual, which requires registration, which requires the facility report your machine type of solvent and annual quantity. In response to her question, what states are similar, Sarah in New Hampshire said dry cleaners register every 3 years. They generate a hazardous waste. Renee in Wisconsin is saying there's a special fee due to revenue for all perk purchases. So that's where they get our mailing list for calendars. I'll add to it, here in Tennessee, we do have the Drycleaner Environmental Response Program, which requires annual registration and indicating which type of solvent you use, because there's a surcharge that goes to that DSERP for potential spills and cleanup. That is based on whether it's a heavy or a light solvent. If it's a light solvent, it's a significantly lower surcharge. But that's how we're able to keep track of what dry cleaners are out there. And I think they're able to distinguish whether it's perk or, well, a heavy versus a light. And pretty much the only heavy one the majority of people use is perk, especially after propyl bromide did not necessarily go over that well.
So one thing I will add to is that concurrently, I'm sure you guys are all aware that the Office of OPPT, what does that stand for? Pollution and pesticides or something like that, or whatever. But they're in charge of the TSCA program, and concurrently they are doing a risk analysis of perk usage across all sectors, and dry cleaning is one of them. And so their analysis goes into much greater detail than we can do at the air level, because they're looking at emission, lingering emissions of perk from the clothing to the consumer, and they're looking at occupational exposures. They were looking, they've been tasked to look at water implications and soil implications, and now I think they're been tasked to go beyond the fence line as far as air analysis, and they're actually stepping into the OAR realm and looking at beyond fence line air emissions analysis. And there's a very good chance that perk, at least in the dry cleaning industry, will be banned eventually because of the health effects of it. And so when that happens, this NESHAP goes away. And so I've recognized, we were court ordered to do this technology review, but we recognized that these rules were some of the original rules written, and the technology has changed since those rules were written. They're, transfer machines are no longer the standard, and these newer fourth and fifth generation machine dry-to-dry machines are more of the standards. And we have alternative solvents now that we have not done a risk analysis on yet. So we recognize all of that, but we were under a court order to do this technology review, and we've got on our plate to take a good look at the NSPS for dry cleaning and the NESHAP for dry cleaning and bring it up to date, because it needs to be reworked, and we recognize that. So that is something that we are keeping on our radar, I guess. But in this action, we were limited in what we could do because of time, because of the court order. So anyway, just thought I'd add that.
So Brian, this sort of relates to the question, or a question Mark had, the dry cleaners he was contacting, and there's a bit of it sounded like there's a bit of unsurety. But this might also be something that John or Mary can speak on as well. What are some of the easy ways to distinguish the generations of machines? We keep hearing the term Gen 3, Gen 4, Gen 5, which I'm sure alludes to the different technology aspects of the machine. But for us, or even an employee at the facility that might not have the manual from, what are easy ways they can tell the generation?
Well, the easiest way with regard to, say, a third versus a fourth, there's no vent. So on a third, you have a vent to an add-on refrigeration device or a vent to an add-on carbon absorption device. If it's a fourth or a fifth, there won't be a vent. So there's nothing, there's no line, there's no, well, there's no hoses or tubes or anything that are connecting to an alternative unit, to an auxiliary unit. There's no vent on a fourth versus a third generation, which is venting to some other piece of equipment. Aside from that, the thirds probably look really old. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because what a third generation is usually about 2006 or before in age.
Yeah, it would be.
Yeah.
So would that be the last year they were manufactured?
I don't know. That's something we could not answer. But yeah, that's a long time ago already. I don't know what the last year they were manufactured. There's not a whole, if there's, and I can tell you from our membership, and I actually have might help a little bit. What were the, and I'm asking this for a different reason. The Korean American community, what was their feeling about this regulation proposed update in general?
Well, when we went to the Korean dry cleaners, we were collecting information, and they indicated that their members were using fourth and fifth generation machines.
Okay, and the reason I asked, we typically represent the larger cleaners. The cleaners have more money because they pay association dues, of course, and so the smallest of cleaners, and I'm glad this was brought up, are that aren't even picked up by the census because they don't have payroll, which is a lot of cleaners in this country. They're the ones typically that probably have those third generation type pieces of equipment. Our members don't. I can't say everybody, but we did send out a notice, and we got one response from somebody who was using third generation equipment. I don't recall if they were a member or not, and simply asked for more time over the, I think, 180 days that was being proposed, because they couldn't do it because of COVID. And COVID has hurt everybody, obviously. As I stated earlier, it's going to knock out probably about 30% of the industry in the next year and a half, now that all the COVID monies have been spent and things of that nature. So, but the easiest way to tell is, one, they look old and they have a vent. Fourth and fifth generation equipment do not rather.
Excellent.
That's a good point too, John, that you brought up that I didn't mention, was that in our proposed rule amendments, I think we're saying that they would have to make the switch within 180 days. So if there are comments related to that 180-day period, that also too, I'd like to be able to collect those comments as well. I'm sure I will, but you know, that's something else that would very much consider, is, you know, the impacts of COVID and such that, you know, perhaps makes the 180 days not achievable.
Well, there's a couple real quick things. One, I can tell you, Mary and I, Mary being the CEO of this our association, representing our members, we have no issue with getting rid of third. We had no issue with that almost 10 years ago, really. The timing will be the issue. There's a lot of things going on. This COVID is really, aside from just messing things up all over the country for a lot of different people, what we don't know, and I suspect will be a problem, is building this equipment. One, a lot of this equipment comes from Italy. That's number one. So while there's also a chip problem for cars, I guess I would assume there's issues with microprocessors, transportation, parts, and things of that nature for this equipment too. So we know that getting supplies for all, you know, grocery stores, dry cleaners can't get hangers, for instance. It's like gold right now. Can't find a hanger. Those things have kind of piled up. But in terms of the rule itself, the proposal, you know, we're fine with that. The only issue we have, and this is where we're going to struggle, are the non-members or smaller cleaners that are not really represented. We tend to say we represent all of the industry, and it's true that we do. But we know that our members typically are the larger cleaners in this country. So the smaller cleaners are the ones that we're more likely to have the third generation equipment, and will probably need more time to purchase new equipment, go out of business, or buy alternative solvents. And one, you're not going to buy new perk equipment anyway. So you're going to buy an alternative solvent, and they need more time to do it. This equipment is very expensive. It's $40, $50, $60, $70,000, depending on the size, and the alternative that's being used. So there are some definitely constraints on that end. But outside of that, that's the only concern that we have for the industry. And we certainly do not want to represent a portion of the industry that is so small and say, oh, they can in 180 days buy new equipment. One, it's probably not going to be possible anyway, because if you order, I can tell you just when we bought a couch, ordered a couch last week, and they said it would be 6 to 8 months. So, trying to buy equipment probably is not something that would happen overnight. Now, this obviously was 180 days after the rule finally gets finalized, but those are so many issues. Only time, not the rule itself, not the proposal.
Gotcha.
Very good information there. So Nancy, you had a question?
I had a couple of things here. And so I've worked with dry cleaners my entire career here we usually put our new people on it. And so Lena has been working on it in recent years, but I've been helping her with it. So Lena, please correct me if I state anything wrong, but a couple things in Kansas, definitely we are talking, 2, maybe 3 employees. So these are all ma and pa types of shops. And in Kansas, when it comes to, because of our Bureau of Remediation that Donovan mentioned, registers similar to what Tennessee does, that gives us data on when these machines were installed. And I didn't have the hard numbers, but Lena has run them. And I'm really shocked by this, you guys. But 16 of our dry cleaner facilities, which includes 17 machines, these are PERC machines were installed before that 2005. I believe it's December 21st of 2005. Somebody can check that and correct me if I'm wrong. But anything installed before then would be considered that third generation machine. And evidently in Kansas, of our entire population, which would be 24 of these facilities, 16 of them are third generation machines. I didn't know the number was that high. I had a feeling it was fairly high, but not quite that high. So that tells you the impact on our facilities here in Kansas. This is actually pretty significant. And I know some of those machines definitely need to either be retrofitted or decommissioned. The other thing I was going to mention is that I believe when it comes to that TSCA, the evaluation by TSCA on PERC, we had a good representation there last spring. And so I want to say it's February or March. They're going to come out with the proposed ruling. I believe it was something like 61 of the 63 uses of PERC were found to be unacceptable. I mean, that's not the right term, but that's what they found. So we ought to be seeing that coming from them. That was the final evaluation. The next step is the proposed rule, and then that proposed rule would go into effect a year from then, which would be like spring of 2023. It's the way I understand it.
That's a good point, and I would add to that our timing on doing this technology review is probably not the best. If it really would make sense for us to come back in after TSCA has made their decisions and then do some sort of I don't want to use the word cleanup, but I mean, be able to assess what we need to do in the air realm to be able to effectively regulate this industry. Unfortunately, we're under corridor, clocks according to the Clean Air Act and the environmental stakeholders. They hold our feet to the fire on that, and so we got these court ordered deadlines that force us to do these technology reviews at a time where the industry is in a bad situation. The use of PERC is in flux, and it's like it doesn't make sense for us to it makes more sense, I guess, to come in afterwards, which I don't expect that Tosca train to pull into the station anytime soon. In other words, it's going to be a long grind, I think. And so, perhaps that gives us a chance to then kind of watch the dust settle, so to speak, and then be able to come in and with a better air regulations to be able to regulate the industry.
Brian, I have a question. And Nancy brought up a good point. It was something that we had discussed as well. It almost seems sort of because we're going to get regulated again at a harsher level, or they're looking at something that would be much more strict, including the ban on PERC. Do you have any idea when there have not, to my knowledge, been any public, or we're supposed to be in some sort of public format where we're going to be able to address comments. Do you know when a proposal is supposed to be out for this?
It's a moving target right now, John, to tell you the truth, because they initially were tasked to look at a certain aspect or matrices of health hazards, and I think their workload has increased, or what they're having to look at in their analyses has increased. And so I think their original timetable, I think, has been thrown off, and I'm not quite sure where they are in trying to catch up, but I do know that it's had some setbacks just based on the analyses that they're having to perform.
Okay. I mean, Nancy, I agree with Nancy. I know they're under some pressure to look at that, and that's going to change everything for PERC users, and probably in the end will be the end for PERC at some point in time going forward or down the road. But again, in the meantime, and I didn't realize there were that many people using third generation pieces of equipment. One thing we know is that dry cleaning is somewhat the dry cleaning use and the use of solvent is declined tremendously just because of the pandemic. That's not going to change because the world has changed as a result of it. So again, the only thing we're looking for is time. And so if Nancy, where they are, if they have that number of cleaners, that would probably be their biggest issue is time. Some decent time to be able to look at getting equipment, looking at selling, getting out, which I suspect a lot of people are trying to do. But we all know selling a dry cleaning plant today is very difficult. Not a lot of buyers.
Nancy, this is Mary. You said half of all the PERC dry cleaners in Kansas are third generation equipment?
Lena actually has been running the numbers. It's more than half based on what she provided me. Lena, can you speak to that? You're muted.
That
Yeah,
seems like a very high figure.
it does to me too. I knew we had at least
Sorry
6 of
about
them,
that. Yeah.
but I'm really surprised about the 17. Now, 2 of those would be large sources. So technically, those third
So
generation.
it's based
ahead.
on the installation date that we found that out of the 16 dry cleaner facilities, we have about 17 machines. Those were installed before 2005 December.
And the full population of our PERC universe in
24, yeah.
Kansas is 24. So, you know, the math on that is, yeah, that's greater, that's 70%.
Yeah, okay.
That seems too high to me.
Yeah, that I don't, so you base the fact that they're third generation on that they were installed before 2005.
Yes, because of the manufacture date.
Oh, okay. Okay. That doesn't mean it's third generation. It could be a
Yes.
fourth generation piece of equipment all the way around. I don't
Many of-
personally know any, except for the one person that commented. I don't know off the top of my head anyone using a third generation. Obviously there are, but I don't personally know any.
John, do you know when, I guess, fourth generation machines were available on the market?
Hmm.
No, but I can find out. I'd
Do you
have to
have
go back
quantity?
and-
I'm sorry, John. Do you
Oh,
have
go ahead, Mary.
piece of solvent that they're using as well? Lena?
Excuse me, yes, we do have the solvent they are using, and that is PCE PERC, yeah.
No, the quantity. How much?
Yes,
Using in the
yes. So only two of them are like above 140. So we think those are the large area sources. Rest of them
Yeah.
are all small area sources.
No, what I was trying to get at is if you're using third generation equipment, you're going through solvent much quicker than a
Uh-huh.
fourth generation. So knowing how much they purchase
Right.
time.
You're exactly right. A
Uh-huh.
lot of ours only purchase 30 gallons a year.
Yes.
But we do, the ones that we suspect are third generation are purchasing, 80 to, we have some that are 275.
225, yeah.
Wow.
And that's a
still
lot
see-
considering, the use of dry cleaners. I don't know how they stay in business and, go through that much perk.
Mm.
Yeah, something.
So I have, so is it like the machine that was installed after 1991 and, I mean, between 1991 and 2005, do they have those carbon absorbers? Some of them have, or some, none of them has.
I'm sorry, the last part, between 91 and 95, did those pieces of equipment have what? I'm sorry.
The dry to dry machine with refrigerator condenser or followed by a carbon absorber.
Well, I don't know. I'd have to, I don't know when they start manufacturing dry to dry fourth generation equipment. I suspect most people in 91 probably had third generation equipment, but because of solvent, there's a lot of reasons people switched equipment. A lot of it had to do because there were cleanup funds that taxed the solvent or tax waste or what have you. And of course, solvent prices are fairly expensive anyway. So people did move to better equipment. But when that actually started, I'd have to, and I can find out, but I don't know right off the bat when they started manufacturing fourth generation equipment.
Okay.
I'd have to ask a manufacturer.
Okay, thank you.
So in the event that somebody does have an older machine, it looks like the proposed rule is to have both refrigerated condensers and the carbon absorption. Is that a easy enough retrofit, or is that calling for a new machine?
You can't retrofit. It would be a whole new machine.
Okay.
The new equipment, what they used to simply call them was no vent, meaning there was no vent to the atmosphere. It was entirely closed. And so the third generation equipment at the end of the drying cycle, so you're drying these clothes and you got most of the perk out of the clothing, but you still have perk vapors in the air. So the condensing coils were typically water-cooled coils, not refrigerant. So the water-cooled coils is based on the temperature of the water and how cool you could make, you know, the water and things of that nature. So you had to do something with those extra vapors. So you send it to an add-on refrigeration unit or add-on carbon absorber. And that carbon would take that vapor and the vapors would adhere to the carbon. And then once a week would have you'd strip it and collect that perk and put it back in your machine. So it was a completely separate process. So if you were going to buy new equipment, you get it all out of there and you buy a new no vent piece of equipment. No vent to the atmosphere at all.
All right. Next question. When the changes came in about 2006 or so, it required enhanced testing. Is that still something that is required even with the changes to having both the refrigerator condenser and the carbon absorber per the proposed rules?
That would still be required. You're talking about using like a TIF detector?
Yeah.
Yep. You still have to do leak detection.
Okay. At least by this point, there's more available out there and it's more inexpensive. I know when it first came through, there's a lot of question, where do you even find this? Find the detectors, and some of them were a little bit pricey. But it is since, from what all I can tell is it has come down in price and become easier to find.
Yeah, they are. When the rule first came out, shoot, Mary, I think we even sold TIF detectors for a while, and you know, everyone bought them and then everyone had them, and you know, no one's buying them anymore.
Right.
You know, from that side, but yeah, they've come down a lot. I think even when we were selling them, I might be making this up a little, they were probably $70, $80 at the time. I just can't remember, but we sold them as a third party to our members at our cost.
John, I seem to remember $120 through Drycleaner Supply. I think that was the name. It was like a
Yes,
paper catalog. It was a bit of a bulky device. Bulky,
It
well,
is.
it was handheld.
It is. And they took it over. We're glad because, you know, that's their job. They sell things and to the industry. So they did take it over. So there's two things, guys. You have a visual inspection. It's the TIF detector. Okay. You know, it's the visual leaks that you're really concerned about, the visible leaks that, you know, from a gasket, like a wheel gasket, where you might have a drip or something of that nature, or you have a drip on the back of the machine. The TIF detectors, you know, they go beep beep, but I mean, sometimes it's hard to tell where they're coming from. Usually it's a gasket or something like that. The big thing was the visual inspection, and then repairing those gaskets that need to be replaced. Whether you do it visually or a TIF detector, it was the same repair you were doing.
So this is Mark again. I and a few of my colleagues conducted a survey in Indiana, and we did encounter some issues with when we tried to call a dry cleaning store. Oftentimes we weren't able to speak with the owner or operator. So we were speaking with counter help, and some of them may have spoken Korean or Spanish. So I don't know, when the rule is published, is there any thought to possibly publishing it in Korean and Spanish as well?
The role? Sure, absolutely. I'm not sure if the dry cleaning community, I'll be honest with you, I don't even know who the dry cleaning community is. That's sort of why I asked their association. But yeah, absolutely. Now, and Spanish as well. That certainly would be helpful. Again, all the cleaners are supposed to abide by the current NESHAP standards that are out there today. That's the way it is, and it's been like that for quite some time. So everybody in this industry should be very knowledgeable because of what you all have done, what we have done, and they've gotten information from 30 different sources. Again, this one is more about time, I think.
Yeah,
than
but
any-
John, I don't know that EPA, they're not going to publish it in Korean, are they?
You just asked.
Yeah, he did, but I
Yeah,
didn't,
I'm not,
gentleman from EPA say yes.
yeah, I'm sorry. I know that there was outreach done on the 2006 rule in Korean. And so I don't see why that would be a problem. We have a group that's specifically devoted to doing outreach to everybody impacted by the amendments. So
And you would publish in Spanish as well?
no, we wouldn't do that in the Federal Register, but we would provide some sort of fact sheet or something on the website that people could access, that they would be able to, at least a fact sheet or something that, some sort of outreach.
And most of that gets picked up by the state on the state level, and that
Right.
gets reproduced.
Yeah, but I do think that, I do remember some sort of outreach in that, along those veins, on the 2006 rule. So
If
not
I
out.
if I recollect, the CFR, I think with the original rule, did have a Korean and Spanish version. And that for whatever reason wasn't updated for the 2005 amendments. But I thought that was interesting. I'd never encountered a CFR with, now these were printed separately. I don't even know if you could still find them on EPA's website. But it was very helpful when you were talking to the Spanish or Korean community, especially if they didn't speak English at all or very little.
Yeah, not so uncommon.
This is Mark again. Like I said a little earlier, I was part of a phone survey. And so, Brian, I can appreciate trying to get a better understanding of the dry cleaning community. I think initially I looked at cleanup sites and I found a lot of them had gone out of business. So I had a big number of potential sites that had used did do dry cleaning in the past, which had disappeared or they changed ownership and moved. And then even during this survey, I found that early in the survey, there was a cleaner that was using PERC in a machine, and then they stopped. They were a drop-off store, and they were just going to wait until they could buy another machine. But I had one where they had two machines. They were able to replace one. They weren't able to replace the other. They were going to continue to operate it until they were able to buy a new machine. And then I had a fair number of people who were older, and given the economic downturn, they weren't able to replace or didn't feel like they could justify the replacement. And at that time, I didn't know about I didn't know when this rule might be finalized or a final proposal from that standpoint itself. I did find in doing the survey that, a lot of them were suspicious when I conducted the survey or were very difficult to reach. So it was a very arduous process.
Brian, this is Mary. Why 180 days for the replacement?
Well, that's our standard. That's our standard buffer period that we use on complying with something, but essentially going with our assumptions. We're assuming that a majority of the facilities are already going to be there, and so there isn't going to have to be a long period of time. Now that, that's all going to depend on what kind of comments we get back or what kind of data we get back from the proposed rule. I mean, that time period, that 180 days will be impacted by, if there's a large number of people that provide comments to say, hey, we're still using older machines, it's going to take us this long, we'll take all that into consideration for sure. But, our assumptions here are that the majority of the industry is already there. So there shouldn't have to be a long period of time to make a transition. Does that answer your question, Mary?
Yes, except I would assume that the people that haven't made the transition are those that can't well afford to make the transition.
Yeah.
So-
Unfortunately, that's the unknown here. So, I mean,
Right.
that's what we're trying to ascertain.
Right.
And something that I think I've heard John say too, also to consider is that if you're making a switch now, you're probably not going to be switching to a PERC machine. And as such, you'll be essentially not subject to the rule anymore.
Correct.
So, that's also
Right.
something. There's some financial incentive there, I guess, if you could get out of having to comply with a NESHAP
Right.
for the
Except
time being.
except for hearing what Lena said, I was very surprised that there are, that many in that Kansas that
Right.
are still using third generation equipment.
But again, like it was based on the installation date and we cannot be sure there. But I do think even though it's not 70%, at least 30 to 40% will be there. Based on, because what we said 70% is what installation date after 2005, right? So,
Right.
so I'm sure there will be many machines that does have the carbon absorber. So I guess those rules will not be applicable to them.
But Mary is correct in saying that it is a safe assumption that the people that, by and large, people that are using third generation equipment are using it because they can't afford to buy other equipment, new equipment. There's no real financial benefit to, I mean, the savings is in new equipment when you start running it. It's costing a dry cleaner a lot more to run that piece of equipment than if they were using a fourth or fifth generation even. So it's most likely they simply can't afford it, or they're biding time to either sell or get out of the industry.
Yeah, for us, like some of them asked also to start up, will they give some incentive? Because now they have to sell the machine and then get back to the petroleum-based solvent. So that's something they wanted to know as well.
Well, definitely excellent discussion. Unfortunately, we ran our hour out. It looks like Susan Miller, who had been on with EPA to talk about impropyl bromide, has had to go on to another meeting. So perhaps we can catch up with her at a later time. Mark, any final thoughts?
No, this actually went longer than I thought. So I probably bad planning on my part.
No, it just shows good discussion.
Yeah. So yeah, I suppose if I would have said, I think we had a presentation one where we tacked it on at 3 o'clock, and if they knew up front, they could have told me whether they could have done that or not. So I probably should have erred on being more conservative and saying, can you do it at 3 for about 10 minutes or so. Yeah, I mean, if they're still available, we could tack it on to next month's presentation, which could be an interesting one. So it might be at 3 o'clock then as well. And so,
I'm so sorry. I just saw something flash out. What's 1 BP?
Oh, and-
That's,
And propyl bromide.
Oh, that's what it is. I have to say, it doesn't exist. It exists, but we don't use it.
yeah,
Uh,
it goes by one, or in propyl bromide or 1-bromopropane, which is the 1 BP designation.
It was
Uh,
something that came out many years ago already. The last time I heard anyone using it was in Canada, northern Canada, and they were using it to clean seal pelts.
Oh, wow.
But it doesn't exist. The 1 or 2 companies that were selling it in this market are long gone. I do not know of any person or company using that anymore. It keeps coming up for some reason, which is odd to me. But it's not used.
Right,
have-
but at least it's not used in the dry cleaner industry.
Yes, that's correct. It's not used in dry cleaning.
I think, John, Susan Miller was coming on because our division just listed 1 BP as a HAP. So it's a new HAP on the HAP list. That's what it wasn't specific to dry cleaning. It just so happened she was coming on the same call as dry cleaning. but she was
Okay,
just coming
gotcha.
on to talk about the fact that NBP is, or MP, whatever the
Propyl
designation.
bromide, yeah.
Yeah, whatever designation you want to use. She was just coming on to announce that it's now listed, it's being listed as a HAP. Yeah.
Got it.
And that being the first HAP ever added to the list since its formation some 30+ years ago.
Be assured we won't be going there.
I also
Uh,
think that that's why you probably have heard about it too, because of the fact that it was going to be the first HAP listed, since the original HAP list and everything. They were trying to figure out all the implications, and because there has been a history of 1 BP with dry cleaning, and dry cleaning was up first out of the gate. I definitely got scrutinized over by the 1 BP folks, and had to tell them the history of it and all that to be able to, it's not in our rules. So.
Right.
made and propyl bromide, I assume, like perk may have been used in degreasing as well.
Well, it was used as I forgot the term, but to replace other solvents that were used in degreasing. And when EPA did that, a lot of industries or a lot of people said, well, it wasn't really supposed to be used in dry clean, but I'm trying to think of the term, but they went ahead and said, we can use it. Let's try it. We're not banned from using it, that kind of thing. So it was, tried and failed. But it really never took hold. There's a lot of PR on it for the first year or two, and then they were gone.
Well, I like to thank Brian for his presentation, his overview of the history of Subpart M, and engaging in this conversation today. I would also like to thank John Meyer and Mary Scalco, both with DLI, for their contributions. I would also like to thank all the other SBAP people who were able to chime in and provide their input. So Donovan, I'm not aware that we're not really looking to write any comment, I don't believe, on this particular rule like we did for 6H.
Yeah, I don't believe we are either, because as has been pointed out, this would mainly be something for more or less phasing out the 3rd generation machine, which is 16, 17 years old at this point. And as John pointed out, it's like with this rule, if you don't have a newer machine, this sort of forces the hand of getting one. But at the same time, if you can afford the initial capital, it will be a cost savings in operating. So yeah, I don't see that we really need to make a comment on the closest, and this is a more general comment that we put out to EPA, is don't require electronic reporting because not everybody has good access to that. It is definitely a helpful thing, but it shouldn't be a requirement.
In this rule, we don't really have an electronic reporting mechanism here. You know, these emissions are leaks. You know, with the newer machines, you're basically talking about trying to track and report leaks, and you know, it's not a, there's not a mechanism there for that. There's the emission factors were all written for transfer machines way back when, and so you know, this a reporting or at least like an emissions inventory type of reporting is not applicable to this source category. So we didn't have to deal with that.
That sounds great. I just know it's been a general trend to a lot of rules that as they're rewritten, that gets added in. So glad that it's not in this one.
Yeah, for bigger sources like Portland cement, or like if you had a boiler or something like that, the electronic reporting is a very effective way of being able to you know, keep tabs on the industry or whatever. Here it's more of a chore.
Tell you, in our industry, if it wasn't for COVID, half of them would probably not know how to use a computer. COVID has been that helpful on that side of it.
Wow. Well, I appreciate DLI's help on the rule, and I appreciate being able to reach out to the SVEPs and gather information as we're doing our research. So I find these calls very helpful, and I hopefully I was able to provide some information for you guys.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.